Pushpin disclaimer: the story is based on real-life interviews, public statements, and reported events involving the internationally renowned artist Lady Gaga. While some of the events, particularly those involving paranormal encounters, have been recounted by the artist herself or her close circle, other parts have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. The intention of this narrative is not to defame, discredit, or sensationalize the subject, but rather to explore the chilling side of fame that often goes unseen. Viewer discretion is advised. This is a horror-themed fictionalized retelling based on reported true experiences. Long before the world knew her as Lady Gaga, the glittering, genre-defying superstar with outrageous fashion and a voice that could shake arenas, Stefani Jo and Angelina Germanotta was just a gifted girl from New York City with a dream. Her rise to stardom wasn't ordinary. It was explosive, theatrical, and almost otherworldly, as if something beyond the normal rules of fate had fast-tracked her into superstardom. By her early 20s, she had already captured the attention of the world with her debut album, The Fame. Songs like Just Dance and Poker Face catapulted her into international fame almost overnight. With her sudden success came immense pressure, constant media scrutiny, and an unshakable feeling that she was being watched, even when alone. Gaga had always considered herself to be spiritually intuitive. Even before fame, she was drawn to the strange and the mystical. She would later reveal in interviews that she believed in spirits, energy, and unseen forces. Fame didn't dull that sense, it amplified it. She often said that the music industry was like entering another realm, a space where energy was exchanged in ways people didn't understand. She would talk about how performances felt like rituals, how her body and mind would become vessels for something greater. But as her career began to skyrocket, Gaga started to feel that something else had come along for the ride, something she didn't invite. Her intense schedules led her from country to country, hotel to hotel, never staying in one place long enough to feel grounded. But some places left deeper impressions than others, impressions that lingered long after she'd checked out. Her team began to notice small oddities, doors closing on their own, whispers in empty rooms, and equipment acting erratically for no explainable reason. At first, it was dismissed as exhaustion, stress, or coincidence. After all, the pressures of global fame could do strange things to the mind. But these experiences became more frequent, more disturbing, and far harder to ignore. Lady Gaga herself began to speak of a presence, a dark shadow that seemed to follow her. At first, she didn't give it much weight. As someone drawn to theatrics and the occult, she assumed it was simply her imagination heightened by stress. But as the sightings increased, so did her unease. She began referring to the entity as him, even before she had a name. She felt his presence in dressing rooms, heard him in hotel suites, and saw fleeting glimpses of a figure lurking in stage wings during rehearsals. Whatever it was, it didn't feel like a fan, it felt like an observer. Silent. Cold. Patient. Her assistants and backup dancers grew concerned. One of her makeup artists even refused to be alone in Gaga's room at night. Another reported feeling hands on her shoulders in an empty hallway. Some brushed it off as group hysteria, but others started to believe that the line between the world of the living and something darker had been crossed, and Lady Gaga might be at the center of it. Yet, Gaga continued with her tour. Ever the professional, she put on a smile, wore her extravagant costumes, and performed with unmatched energy. But behind the stage lights and beneath the glitter, something darker lingered. Fans saw only the show, few knew what was happening behind the scenes. The haunting wasn't dramatic at first. It crept in slowly. It grew over time. And soon, it would reveal its name. As Gaga's fame burned brighter, so did the shadows around her. But nothing could have prepared her or her team for what would happen in one particular city, London. A city with centuries of ghost stories and haunted history. It was there, inside one of the city's most luxurious hotels, that her encounters would turn from eerie to terrifying. It was there she would meet Ryan, the spirit who would follow her for years. Lady Gaga arrived in London in the winter of 2009 during her famed Monster Ball tour. By then, she was already a global sensation, known not only for her music, but also for her eccentric costumes, surreal stage presence, and unpredictable behavior. The hotel selected for her stay was one of the city's most prestigious, an elegant, historic building in the heart of London, once frequented by royalty and celebrities for over a century. But beyond its luxurious decor and golden chandeliers, the hotel had another reputation, one that wasn't printed in the brochures. It was said to be haunted. The staff, though professional and discreet, quietly acknowledged it. Some of them refused to enter certain areas alone. Others avoided the top floor altogether. But none. She reportedly stood in silence for nearly a minute upon entering, looking slowly around the space as if sensing something invisible. Then she simply said, "It's cold in here," and walked in. That night, she barely slept. Despite the heater being on full blast, Gaga claimed the room felt freezing. She wrapped herself in thick blankets, but the chill was unnatural. Even stranger were the sounds: soft knocks at the door in the middle of the night, footsteps in the hallway when no one was booked in adjacent rooms, and what she later described as a low humming that echoed through the walls. It wasn't music. It wasn't electrical. It sounded like someone humming a lullaby, but distorted, sad, almost mournful. The next day, she told her assistant about the strange night. He laughed it off until he, too, started hearing things while setting up her wardrobe. Mirrors in the room fogged on their own. Her costume jewelry had been rearranged when they returned from rehearsal, although no one had entered the suite. Even the hotel's electronic key log showed no activity while they were away. It was as if someone or something was already inside. One night, as Gaga stood in front of the full-length mirror practicing choreography, she saw movement behind her. A tall, dark figure flashed by in the reflection, so quick it could have been dismissed as a shadow, except there was no one else in the room. She turned sharply, expecting to see a dancer or assistant, but it was empty. Nothing. Silence. Only the sound of her own shallow breathing. That was the moment she said she felt him. She didn't know who he was yet. But the presence became undeniable. A dark, masculine energy that loomed in the background. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't benign either. It was simply there, watching. Gaga began to refer to it vaguely in conversations. "He doesn't like that costume," she said once after a dress fitting. Her stylists nervously laughed, but one of them later confided that her makeup brushes were moved overnight and laid out in a pattern resembling a cross. One particular evening, the entire floor's power flickered. Staff rushed to investigate, thinking it was a technical failure. But only Gaga's suite and the hallway outside were affected. Cameras showed nothing. The fuse box hadn't been touched. It lasted less than a minute, but it was enough to send shivers down everyone's spine. That night, Gaga dreamed of drowning. In her dream, she was submerged in a bathtub, held down by cold hands, unable to scream. She awoke gasping, her sheets soaked in sweat. The bathtub, she noticed, was filled with water, though she hadn't touched it. The hotel's management was tight-lipped, but one older concierge finally broke silence. He whispered to one of Gaga's security team that a guest named Ryan had died in the same suite years ago, an aspiring musician who overdosed quietly in the room. No press had ever reported it. The hotel covered it up, fearing bad publicity. But the staff had never forgotten. The name Ryan would soon become the center of Gaga's terrifying experiences. She didn't run. She didn't demand another room. Instead, she stayed. She believed the spirit wasn't trying to hurt her, but was desperate for something: acknowledgement, maybe. Attention. Or perhaps, recognition from someone who had achieved the success he never could. And the presence that had revealed itself in the London hotel seemed to cling to her like a shadow, silent, persistent, uninvited. And now it had a name. Ryan. At first, she hesitated to say the name aloud. It felt personal, intimate, as though naming the spirit would somehow make it stronger. But she couldn't ignore what was happening. In dressing rooms, in rehearsal studios, even on planes, Ryan made his presence known. It wasn't always terrifying. Sometimes, it was just a cold draft in a sealed room. Other times, it was the unmistakable feeling of someone breathing down her neck when she was alone. But the worst part wasn't the chills or the flickering lights, it was the feeling of being watched constantly, even in her most private moments. During a tour stop in Berlin, Gaga confided in her longtime backup dancer, Leo, who had also been having strange dreams, visions of drowning, a young man screaming in a dark room, and the word forgiven written in condensation on mirrors. Leo was shaken, and together they pieced the pattern. The spirit wasn't attached to the hotel in London, it was attached to her. She started calling him Ryan more frequently. Ryan doesn't like this outfit. In Chicago, Gaga was in the middle of a costume change between sets when a mirror cracked spontaneously. She hadn't touched it, no one had. Her assistant screamed, and Gaga simply stared at the broken glass, unfazed. "He's upset tonight," she said calmly, and walked back to the stage as if she was trying to communicate with him. She didn't want to banish him. She wanted to understand him. Gaga believed in creative energy, and she thought Ryan might be trapped between two worlds, hers and wherever he came from. In a rare behind-the-scenes moment caught on a phone by a makeup artist, Gaga was seen staring into a mirror and whispering. The video was shaky and only a few seconds long, but when reviewed later, a distorted male voice could be heard faintly whispering back. No one could explain it. The room had been otherwise silent. What chilled everyone most, however, was a photo taken by a fan backstage. Gaga was posing in a hallway with her arms outstretched, smiling, but behind her, reflected in the glass of a cabinet, was the clear outline of a tall man with hollow eyes. The image went viral, and though skeptics called it a trick of light, Gaga never denied it. In fact, she reposted the photo with the caption, "He likes to be seen sometimes." By now, Ryan had become a part of her world, like another dancer on tour, always just off stage. But as the encounters deepened, his presence started to grow darker. Whatever Ryan wanted, he wasn't done. And Gaga knew it. She needed answers. Not from security, not from hotel staff, but from someone who could actually speak to the other side. And so, she did what many would call desperate. She called a medium. By the time Lady Gaga reached the US leg of her Monster Ball tour, her performances had become iconic. But when they reviewed the playback, the footage showed something chilling, a dark silhouette walking across the screen, clearly not part of the video feed. It moved in a way that didn't match the choreography. It was too tall, too slow, and too distorted to be anyone on the crew or stage. They checked all camera angles. No one could explain it. At the next show in Dallas, things escalated. Midway through Bad Romance, a blinding light above the stage exploded. The burst sent sparks raining down, forcing Gaga to pause the performance. What the crowd didn't know was that just seconds before, her in-ear monitor had gone silent, cutting off all sound. She later told her team that in that silence, she heard a whisper, "Don't forget me." After that, the paranormal glitches began happening more often. Microphones would shut off during one even claimed to feel icy fingers wrap around his wrist during a solo, causing him to fall mid-dance. The incident was caught on camera. The fall looked accidental, but those backstage knew better. He wasn't clumsy, he was grabbed. Crew members began refusing to work night shifts alone. One lighting tech quit entirely after an incident in which all of the theater lights switched on at once at 3:33 a.m. Security footage showed no one in the booth. But the most terrifying moments came when Gaga herself performed solo numbers under a single spotlight. That was when Ryan seemed to make his presence most visible. During one intimate piano ballad, as Gaga sang when the song ended, she paused for a long time before standing up and quietly whispering, "Thank you, Ryan." She began including subtle references to him in interviews, calling him her unseen friend, and once cryptically told a late-night host, "Sometimes, the dead want more than remembrance. They want recognition." The host laughed it off, but Gaga's expression remained serious. Her fans, many of whom followed her every word, started speculating online. Some thought Ryan was a metaphor. Others believed he was real. Her dancers began having synchronized nightmares, each involving drowning, a cracked mirror, and a male voice calling out in pain. It all pointed back to Ryan. But while the team was frightened, Gaga became strangely calm, almost too accepting. She spoke to the air at times, pausing during rehearsals as if listening to someone no one else could hear. One day, she halted an entire run-through of Speechless and refused to continue until the piano was moved 6 feet to the left. "He's standing there," she said. No one questioned it. Gaga believed Ryan wasn't just haunting her for attention, he wanted something more. Closure, maybe? Or release. Whatever it was, his presence was now intertwined with her music, her team, and her entire creative process. But not everyone agreed she could handle this on her own. Behind her back, 2 members of her inner circle contacted a spiritual medium. They didn't tell Gaga right away. They simply wanted answers. What they didn't expect was for the medium to walk into the rehearsal room and immediately say, "There's a boy here. A young man. He's been waiting for her." And that's when things got serious. As the strange occurrences, Avery had a reputation for professionalism and a no-nonsense approach to the paranormal. She didn't advertise her services publicly, she didn't need to. When Avery arrived at the rehearsal space in New York, the mood in the air was thick and anxious. Gaga wasn't told beforehand. The idea of bringing in a medium was debated fiercely among the crew. Some felt it was disrespectful to Gaga's beliefs, others thought it was a necessary intervention. But when she saw Avery standing quietly at the edge of the room, Gaga didn't lash out. She simply stared at her for a long moment and said, "You feel him too, don't you?" Avery nodded. They sat alone together in Gaga's dressing room. No cameras. No assistants. Just the 2 of them and a white candle burning low in a glass jar. Avery didn't ask too many questions. She said the energy was already too loud to ignore. "He's young. Lost. He feels robbed," Avery whispered, closing her eyes. "He doesn't know how to move on because part of him still thinks he belongs here, with you." Gaga said nothing at first, but her expression darkened. "I think he died before he saw me become someone," she finally murmured. "Like he never got to finish something, and now he wants to finish it through me." Avery nodded again. "He thinks you owe him." The session turned into something more intense than either woman anticipated. Gaga agreed to allow Avery to perform what she called a spiritual boundary-setting ritual. Not an exorcism, Avery was clear about that. This isn't about casting him out. It's about creating space. If he's staying, it needs to be on your terms. That night, after her team cleared the building, Avery set up the ritual in the center of the rehearsal hall. Gaga sat barefoot inside a ring of salt and candles, dressed in a long white robe, eyes shut in meditation. Avery moved around her slowly, humming a low tone, whispering phrases in Latin and Old Italian languages, but most importantly, Gaga herself seemed different. Calmer. Grounded. She told Avery she believed Ryan had been heard, and that was all he really needed. "He just wanted to be seen, not forgotten," she said softly. "He was a failed artist, and I became what he never could. He didn't want to steal it, he just wanted to feel it." Avery left the tour with a final warning: spirits don't always disappear when you acknowledge them. Sometimes they stay. But if they feel respected, they won't harm you. From that point forward, Gaga treated Ryan not as a ghost, but as part of her creative world, an invisible collaborator. She left candles lit in hotel rooms. She spoke softly to empty chairs before shows. And occasionally, in interviews, she would glance off camera and smile faintly. "Some of my best ideas," she once said, "don't come from me." Despite the relative calm that followed Avery Lane's intervention, Lady Gaga knew deep down that Ryan hadn't truly left. The disturbances didn't disappear completely, they only quieted. There were still moments, mirrors that misted unexpectedly, a flicker of motion in the corner of her eye, and a persistent sense that someone was just over her shoulder. Ryan's presence had shifted, not vanished. And while Gaga had made peace with him on some level, a part of her feared that the attachment went deeper than she had realized. Then came the night of the private ritual, a desperate attempt to sever whatever invisible thread bound her to the ghost of a man she never met in life, but who had somehow become a haunting fixture in her fame. It happened in New Orleans, a city rich with spiritual history, voodoo traditions, and centuries of ghost stories. Gaga had always been drawn to New Orleans, the music, the mysticism, the darkness that simmered beneath its beauty. But on this visit, she wasn't there to celebrate. She was there to seek release. She and Avery had remained in quiet contact after the earlier session. When the disturbances began increasing again, louder whispers, disembodied voices during recordings, and objects falling during rehearsals, Gaga reached out. "He's getting impatient," she texted. "It's time." They agreed to conduct a full spiritual cleansing in an undisclosed location, a mansion on the outskirts of the French Quarter, owned by a private friend who practiced Creole spiritualism. The room was prepared in advance, heavy curtains drawn, floorboards sprinkled with white ash and salt, sigils carved into candle wax, and offerings placed at the four corners: wine, water, a broken guitar string, and an old photograph Gaga said reminded her of Ryan, even though she wasn't sure why. The ritual began just before midnight. Avery stood in the center, chanting softly in a blend of French Creole and Latin. Gaga sat across from her, cross-legged, eyes closed, hands resting on her knees. She was dressed in a simple black robe, no makeup, no ornaments, bare, exposed, vulnerable. Around her, a circle had been drawn with chalk and crushed sage, meant to contain whatever might rise. The air grew thick. First came the cold, unnatural and sudden. Then the smell, faint but distinct, like wet soil and faded cologne. Gaga's breathing grew heavy. Her lips trembled. Avery continued to chant, her voice rising as she called upon the spirit of Ryan, inviting him forward, not to torment, not to linger, but to speak and be released. That's when the candle flames began to dance violently. Suddenly, Gaga arched backward, letting out a sound between a gasp and a cry. Her eyes remained shut, but her face contorted as if in pain or possession. Avery rushed to her side, placing her hands gently on Gaga's shoulders, grounding her, whispering, "You are in control. You are not his vessel." Then Gaga spoke. But it wasn't her voice. The tone was deep, strained, distant, like a young man's voice echoing through a tunnel. I waited. I watched. She never looked back. She left me in the dark. Avery's eyes widened. The voice wasn't Gaga's. It couldn't be. Even the mansion's owner, observing from the shadows, gasped audibly. Gaga's lips continued moving. She was my promise. My light. She took my dream. The room pulsed with energy. The candles flared. The sigils on the floor seemed to shimmer with heat. Avery pressed her forehead to Gaga's and shouted, "You are seen, Ryan. You are heard. But you no longer belong here." At that moment, Gaga screamed loud and piercing and collapsed forward, her body trembling. A powerful gust of wind, from nowhere, blasted through the room, extinguishing every candle in a single breath. Silence. For what felt like minutes, no one moved. Then Gaga stirred, slowly raising her head. Tears streamed down her face. She looked around, dazed, and whispered, "It's gone. He's gone." But Avery wasn't so sure. Later that night, after Gaga had been helped to rest, Avery examined the burned-out candles. One of them, the one placed closest to Gaga's seat, had melted in a strange, twisted shape, resembling a face. And in the circle of ash around it were what looked like fingerprints, but no one had stepped inside. Avery said nothing. She quietly gathered her tools and left the room, knowing that whatever Ryan had been, his grip was finally loosening. But spirits that cling as hard as he did never disappear entirely. Sometimes they fade into memory. Sometimes they linger at a distance, waiting. And for Lady Gaga, even after the ritual, there would always be one question lingering in the air. Did I set him free, or just further into the shadows? In the days following the ritual in New Orleans, something shifted around Lady Gaga. Her entourage felt it first, not a complete absence, but a lightness, as though the heavy veil that had cloaked her energy was beginning to lift. The air didn't feel as tense. The dark corners of her tour bus no longer pulsed with unseen weight. The mirrors remained whole. The instruments played without interference. But despite the welcome calm, Gaga herself seemed more introspective than relieved. She still lit candles before shows. She still left a chair empty in her dressing room. And occasionally, she'd stare into space, as if waiting for something or someone. The ritual had broken something open in her, a part she hadn't even known existed. It wasn't just about the haunting anymore. It was about connection, about grief for someone she never met but felt inexplicably bound to. And, most haunting of all, about guilt. Then, 2 weeks later, during a rare off day in Boston, the final message came. Gaga had checked into a small boutique hotel known for its historical charm. No fans, no chaos, just quiet. That evening, after a long soak in the clawfoot bathtub, she stepped out to find the room's mirror fogged over despite the ventilation. She wiped it with her hand. For a moment, nothing. Then, slowly, as if drawn by an invisible fingertip, letters began to form from inside the fog. I heard you. She froze. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in awe. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message unmistakably clear. Ryan was saying goodbye. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was content. A final acknowledgement that whatever had tethered him to her obsession, longing, regret, had been released. He had heard her. She had seen him. And for the first time, he was at peace. Instead of reacting with panic, Gaga smiled softly. She stepped closer to the mirror, laid her palm against the cool glass, and whispered, "You were never forgotten." That was the last time she ever felt him. From that point on, her world began to open up again. The fear faded. Her creativity surged, but in a different way, more grounded, more human. She started writing songs that were deeply personal, stripped down and raw. The theatrics remained, but there was a new edge to her performances, something honest. Her team noticed it too. One dancer even joked that the ghost got what he needed and left her all the talent. Years later, in an interview for a documentary, Gaga would allude to this chapter of her life. I think some people leave this world without finishing what they started. Some of them don't get the applause they deserve. And if they find someone who can be heard, they cling to that echo. I was his echo for a while. When asked directly if she still believed in ghosts, she nodded and said, "Of course. One used to follow me around. He had a name. And he meant no harm. He just wanted his song heard." For those who were close to her, the story of Ryan was never fully forgotten. There were too many witnesses. Too many inexplicable events. But Gaga never turned it into publicity. There were no books, no interviews detailing the full story. It remained personal, something between her and the shadow that once followed her through hotel rooms and stage lights. Yet, fans still search for signs. In the liner notes of one of her albums, a small line reads, "To those who wait in the wings, your time will come." Was that for Ryan? Maybe. Maybe not. But for those who know the story, it was his final bow. The ghost of a forgotten artist who followed one of the world's brightest stars until he, too, was finally seen. And then, silently, stepped off stage. Years passed. Albums came and went. Awards filled her shelves. Lady Gaga, once dismissed as a fleeting pop act, had proven herself a generational artist, a performer of staggering range, from boundary-pushing anthems to Oscar-winning ballads. But those who followed her career closely always noticed a change that began sometime around her Monster Ball era. A new depth in her lyrics. A vulnerability behind her strength. And occasionally, a shadow behind her eyes. That shadow had a name, Ryan. Gaga never publicly retold the full haunting story. But in subtle moments, interviews, documentaries, offhand remarks, she gave glimpses into how deeply the experience had affected her. In one interview, when asked about her belief in the supernatural, she replied, "You don't have to believe in ghosts to be haunted. Sometimes, it's not the dead who haunt us, it's the dreams we never got to live. Or worse, the dreams someone else couldn't." Those closest to her knew how real the ordeal had been. Her creative team, dancers, sound crew, they'd all seen or felt Ryan in their own ways. Some were still unnerved by the memory. Others treated it like a spiritual encounter, a chapter that reminded them how delicate the boundary between life and death can be, especially in the world of fame, where identities often blur and souls sometimes get lost. But Gaga's relationship with Ryan evolved into something else entirely, a source of creative reflection. She didn't fear him anymore. Instead, she began exploring themes of lost ambition, spiritual longing, and unseen pain in her music. Songs like Speechless, Dope, and Million Reasons carried a haunting undertone, almost as if addressing someone long gone, someone still listening. In an episode of her behind-the-scenes documentary 5'2", Gaga is seen sitting alone at a piano in a dark studio. As she plays a few gentle chords, she pauses and looks toward the ceiling. "You still following me?" she murmurs with a faint smile. The crew laughed nervously, but she didn't. That moment never made it into the final cut, but those who were there say it was genuine. She would often say that fame has its own kind of spiritual weight. "When millions of people know your name," she once said, "you stop belonging just to yourself. And sometimes others, seen or unseen, try to step into your light." Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was compassion. But Gaga never treated Ryan like an enemy. She saw him as a reminder of what fame can destroy, of what happens to dreams when they die in silence. For her, Ryan became a symbol, not just of a haunting, but of the forgotten voices in the industry. The ones who never got their chance to be heard. In one particularly heartfelt interview, when asked if she believed that Ryan ever really moved on, she looked away for a moment before answering. "I think he did. But I also think he visits from time to time, not to scare me. Just to check in. To see if I still remember him. And I do." She paused. "I always will." Today, Lady Gaga continues to be a powerhouse in music, film, and fashion. But behind the fame, behind the artistry, there lingers a story known only to a few, a chilling, mysterious, and strangely beautiful connection between a living star and a forgotten soul. A connection that blurred the lines between reality and the unseen, between ambition and obsession, between a song heard by millions and a voice that no one but her could hear. Ryan may never be found in a history book, or in a forgotten news article, or even in the hotel's records. But in the echoes of a dark room, in the fog on a mirror, or in the pause between piano notes, he was real. And Lady Gaga never let him fade. 75.